Hello, everybody. Welcome to How Salesforce Builds Salesforce Using Heroku, if you're in the right place. This is me. I'm Lyric Hartley. I'm a customer solutions architect at Heroku. What that generally means is that I help sort of our top tier customers work on their architecture and figure out how they're going to do things, integrate systems or whatever. And then how that relates back into this, how Salesforce does it, is that Salesforce is actually, like I'm the solution architect for Salesforce using Heroku as well. So I get involved in all the projects that Salesforce is leveraging Heroku with, or the ones that make it through me. Sometimes people run off and do their own thing. Forward-looking statement, I know you guys have seen 1,000 of these. I don't think I say anything in here that really justifies it, but it's got to be in there. So basically, we're going to talk about just briefly what is Heroku, because that often comes up that folks don't know what Heroku is, why Salesforce loves Heroku, and the patterns of usage. Like I've started to see over the few years certain patterns evolving in how Heroku is getting leveraged by Salesforce teams. And then hopefully we'll have time for Q&A. Is that not working? There we go. So who here currently uses Heroku? Do we have some Heroku users? Oh, good. All right. And then who uses Heroku and Salesforce together? Like maybe using Heroku Connect or something? Okay. Oh, nice. So just so that those who aren't using Heroku, to give you an idea of where all this fits in, I don't know if you can quite see there, but if you look, kind of on this far end here is where Heroku hangs out. So we have this no code to low code to some code area of things. These areas, you may be noticing a trend, I guess up to here too, both in terms of Heroku usage and in terms of their integration, so that those things get easier to put them together. But yeah, Heroku's in this past the low code. When you want to extend something, do it together, that's where it sits on that part of the little rainbow. I don't know why this thing's hard to... So along that same theme, from the no code down to you write a bunch of code, you kind of fall into these same patterns. So down here, where you're doing software as a service, this is where other people are managing all the stuff. You know, you're running on Salesforce. You're not having to, you don't have any requirements that need you to start doing things off the platform. But once you start needing to do things off of Salesforce itself, then you can move into this Heroku land place where you can control the application and the data and how you do things, but you don't have to worry about all this stuff. And then as you start needing more control, you might move this way. Or generally, people actually end up in kind of a hybrid, either here or occasionally here if you have some other needs. Yeah, that works better. So Heroku, so here's sort of the official definition. I think the takeaway for this one is this line, the fastest way to go from idea to URL. This kind of, I would say, what could also apply to Salesforce, and at least on the developer side, is you're trying to spend your time doing the things that are actually meaningful for your company and not spending much time doing things that you probably don't care to do, like racking servers or whatever. So the way Heroku approaches this, so this would be sort of a normal thing, right? You've got this idea, you know, on the far end there, you want it to pop out there and be useful to the world and get your business value. But typically, you'll have to make all these decisions along the way, whether your operating system or whatever. But things like whether you're using Ubuntu or Red Hat probably aren't going to make a big difference to what's going on down here. So Heroku sort of takes those things out of the middle for you, so that all you're doing is, you know, get push into Heroku. Then we handle keeping it up, having support that are 24/7. Allowing you to add on additional services. If all of a sudden your app needs Elasticsearch and you're trying to build out some other things, then we have a bunch of different add-on services that you could add to that, and then scale. So you can take it from just a free, you're just running some little project to test things, up to you're running some of the largest websites that are out there right now. Oh, so I'm just going to push through those. I'm not a fan of the animation. Just to give you an idea on the scale side. So we do about 13 billion requests per day. I think that might be up a little bit. 6 million apps, and an app may be composed of many what we call dynos inside there, just kind of like servers. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave you guys out. I'm just staring at my back the whole time, sorry. And then add-ons, sort of things I mentioned, like if you wanted to add on additional services, whether it's data services or monitoring or any other things that you might need. And so how does this meet Salesforce needs? Well, we have a need for security, obviously, as I'm sure you've all heard, right? Trust is number one. It's a motto around everything we do. Agility, we need to be able to test ideas and throw them away if they're not any good, move fast. Scale, because if that does pan out, we need to be able to take it to something at a large enough scale that's supportable and usable. Integration, because we tie in with other non-Salesforce systems, so we need a way to do that. And then extending Salesforce orgs, because I'm sure everyone has encountered things that you're like, I keep trying to do this on the org, but I'd like to do it over here. I'd like to use Postgres and have a bunch of workers that do this or something and feed it back in. So that's where Heroku fits in. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about each of those buckets, and then what features Salesforce ends up leveraging to meet those needs, and some of our example architectures. So private spaces, for those who haven't heard of it, it's basically you get these private, like network isolated. They're under the covers. They're VPCs, if you're virtual private clouds, if you're familiar with that. So you get a VPC, and then for the dynos, sort of the web front end, and then when you do data services, whether that's Kafka or Redis or Postgres or whatever, you get this network isolated peering so that none of that traffic leaves this dedicated space. So it's all a local network. And then you get static outbound IPs, so if you need to do whitelisting, and then inbound, you can also set trusted IP ranges. So just to make sure on both ends of a connection, you're locking things down. We actually have a requirement internally that all the projects have to use spaces. So this is kind of what we end up doing with a lot of them. You have to use spaces, trusted IPs. All the IPs always end up getting locked down. There's a feature in Heroku where you can whitelist add-ons, so that you can say these are ones that we've vetted, trust has gone through and poked at them, and we think they're good. And so we will leverage the feature in Heroku to only expose the ones that are whitelisted. Static IPs, of course, we use that in the same trusted IP stuff. And two-way SSL, that doesn't necessarily fall into a feature there, but it's just something that we always end up adding as another layer. So this are some of the trust applications. So actually by the trust group or the trust related. So if you've used Salesforce Authenticator, we do a lot of our data protection, use Heroku for a lot of probing the orgs, doing DDoS attacks, doing various things to sort of work on our trust level. And I'll just show you a couple. So that's the Authenticator if you haven't seen it. One thing that's actually, not that it's a plug for Authenticator, but I love that they can do trusted locations. So like if you work from home, like I do and like many people do, to set that up as a trusted location actually makes it super, super easy. Refocus, I don't know if there's been talks on this today, but Refocus is a tool we use internally for monitoring the data centers and various services. And so whatever teams can start pumping in their data points into Refocus, and it lives on Heroku. I believe it's Node. Actually, it has a bit of Java too, but it's mostly a Node app. It's open source. That's part I meant to say. So anybody can download it from GitHub and use it. I can give you a URL. And then the trust page. I'm sure people have looked at the trust page. That lives on Heroku. It's Node and it lives on Heroku. Agility. So the feature that sort of allows the agility in Heroku land is Heroku Flow or Heroku pipelines, which is for continuous delivery and integration. Are people doing like CI/CD pipelines? Yeah, a few. So and this is kind of where when you also see the Salesforce DX stuff starting to move in this. This is kind of that theme where we're taking things. The idea, for those who don't do CI/CD, is that you have the different stages of your application. So you may have a branch that's being tested. We can look at GitHub, pull it in, create what we call a review app that will go away as soon as that branch gets merged. Actually, I should say, are many people using Git? Git users? Okay, yes, all right. So yes, and then your feature branch will get, well, actually, once the feature branch gets merged, so then you can have it auto-deployed to your staging, move things along, and then you can even kind of what you're seeing on the end is where the private spaces can be in different, like, geographically dispersed areas. So if your app is deployed globally, then you can have your stage, when it goes into production, deploy to all those different ones across the planet. Trailhead, obviously. Trailhead, I guess, is actually, I've found that a lot of people didn't know that Trailhead runs on Heroku. But the Trailhead, it's actually a Rails app, runs on Heroku. It's got some other bits, that non-Rails bits, but they heavily use a lot of the features. They use Flow and Pipeline for all their development, the web dynos, the back-end workers for processing stuff, and then they also leverage Connect for talking to some back-end orgs where they share data or store data. The org chart app, I don't know if you guys have seen this. This one's super quick. This is also open source. This is one that you can literally spin up in an hour if you want to impress somebody. It's a Node app, and then it uses Connect to talk to the org, pull down whatever org data. You wouldn't have to, even if you're storing your data in Workday or something, then you could shoot it straight into Postgres using a worker or whatever. And then if you use a Canvas app, to display that, then it can show up in S1 if you're using Salesforce 1 or things like that. Again, another open source one. Integration extension. I think this is probably the biggest bucket. Connect, for those who aren't aware, Heroku Connect is it's a service that Heroku has that does bidirectional syncing of your Salesforce data with a Heroku Postgres database. So if you want to get that data into Heroku and then do things like either a front-end app for your customers, or you want to do some data munging or whatever, and then push it back into Postgres, then it'll sync back over to your Salesforce org. So we'll do that, especially when you're integrating with multiple orgs. I don't know how many people, just out of curiosity, how many people deal with multiple Salesforce orgs? A few? Okay. This is, you'll see a slide here soon where we do this, but we'll use it also for deduping information between orgs. So you may sync in one, sync in the other, and look for like duplicate accounts or accounts that should be linked together or whatever. This one, I think this one's going to be this one is not out yet, but if you come to Dreamforce, you'll be using it. This is, we're using Prediction.io for the sort of AI portions, Connect to bring, so there's, like if you've gone through registration for Dreamforce and that org that you're in, that data that gets stored, we use Connect to bring that over into Heroku. And then on the Heroku side, we can then leverage Prediction.io to start looking for what sessions you might want to go to, right? And the same thing as like you'd see on Amazon. Oh, people who liked this also liked this kind of thing. So this is kind of what the back end of that looks like. And Spark. I thought they were going to add Kafka in there, but I don't think they're doing that right now. But this is becoming a very common pattern within Salesforce, is to do this type of thing. Either to offload the data from the org and do AI type stuff, like you may have seen with some of the Einstein work, where it's like it pulls the data over, does a bunch of stuff, sends back in, and maybe what comes back is the likelihood of closing a deal or leads analysis or something. But this is becoming a pretty common pattern within Salesforce. This is what I was mentioning earlier with Connect and using it to integrate a bunch of different Salesforce orgs. So what we do is whenever we acquire a company, they tend to already have their own Salesforce org, and we have to figure out how to get all that stuff to fit together. So we have this thing we call the Data Hub, and it uses Connect, connected into So as that new acquisition is coming in, we set up connect to that org, start bringing it into our Postgres. Then we can also compare with our personal is the wrong word, our enterprise org, to either see correlations between that data. But then the next phase of this, right now it was just, let's see all this data because we haven't had enough visibility. The next stage will be leveraging some of the AI with Einstein as well as Kafka for creating a bus between some of those so that the other folks, the other acquisitions, see that data as well and they can do their own BI work. This picture's a little dated because we've changed some of this very recently. But basically, same thing. If you're on Salesforce.com and you're filling out the little questionnaire on the back end, this thing goes off to Heroku, makes its way through various services to look at who you are in your whole picture, and then creates a lead, I guess, based on that. I'm not on the sales side, so it's a little. Concierge I was going to mention just because it ties together a bunch of different projects. Concierge is our internal support for everybody. We used to have all these different systems. You'd go to one place for your HR stuff and one place for to get a new keyboard or whatever. So we decided to just kind of simplify it. That's pretty much all you can do. You can search for whatever you want, and then you can look at your tickets. And then once you search, you'll get these articles that might help you. If the article doesn't have what you need, then you can click to log a ticket, and it'll know from what the article is. It'll use that information to pre-populate the ticket because it'll know what you're looking for. It knows who you are and what you're looking at. And then, or you can fire up chat with one of our internal support people. So what that architecture, this has actually changed over the years. So just recently it went from, there was some data we had to reach internal to Salesforce to reach that data. And so we've been slowly moving the things from the data center into Heroku. It still does reach out to the various internal orgs here, either exposed in the way of a Canvas app or using the APIs. Some of this will get turned into Connect. It's kind of the next phase. I'll kind of show where we are now. So now we've gotten rid of that other piece and we're able to use Elasticsearch inside Heroku. And then once we can use Connect in Heroku, then all of that app will live just on the Heroku side. And I was just giving you an idea because it uses so many features of both Salesforce and Heroku. Like they use Flow, they use pipelines, private spaces, of course, but for identity, they hook in for SSO, Salesforce One because it has the mobile version, Service Cloud because all the tickets and cases get created. It just has a slew of stuff that we use. This is the Heroku EventBus. So this one is a little bit of Heroku using Heroku, but there's a reason I'm going to bring it up. One, because Heroku now has Kafka as one of our products, or we manage Kafka, I should say, or do people know what Kafka is, or generally? Okay. So we've kind of moved from this, I think where most people are in this end-to-end type architecture instead of more of a central bus type architecture that reaches out to things. So this is what we've switched to, and now these systems can be things like other orgs, like you saw in the Concierge where we're reaching out to the different orgs. So now we can send in stuff to Kafka. It can go off to the various places and then update things in the various Salesforce orgs according to what needs to happen. So let's say you bought some account and it included something, and now you're deploying an app, then it can link, the account is over here, so we can use that for billing. We can use this part for actually deploying the app, and those events just go on the bus and various people can listen to it. This would be a common pattern, because some people are like, well, how does that all fit together? So a common pattern with teams right now is to, when something happens in the org, and I think there's some stuff, you may have seen some Salesforce events beta stuff that came out recently. I think this is where we'll end up switching here to the events. And that'll go into Heroku, and an app that's there will do whatever munging it needs to, stick it on the Kafka bus, and then do whatever you're going to do with it. And then eventually stick it back in Connect so that it resyncs, so that you can do all your stuff out here and then just have it kind of flow back in, and you don't have to think about it. There's not much of that you yourself have to be concerned with. Scalability, I have one in here, I think. The Salesforce IoT Cloud runs on Heroku. I don't think, it seems like folks typically don't know that either, but it's at massive scale. So a common misconception, I would say, with folks using Heroku is that it's where you do development stuff, and then when you're done with that, you kind of go somewhere else for production. And so it's kind of putting that in there to say you can run extremely massive apps on Heroku, and it'll keep going and keep going. So just some takeaways, I guess, were back to the reasons: security, agility, scalability, integration, and extending. And like I'd say, I think integration, extending, at least for us internally, tends to be one of the primary use cases for Heroku. And I was going to go to Q&A. I didn't know how much time I was going to end up with. Do we have any questions? Oh, there's someone over there. He's bringing a microphone since it's being recorded.
We are talking about Heroku using Postgres database. Where the big object come into the picture? If somebody is doing enterprise level application and he want to store all the like platform event or Kafka events,
right?
Where the big data come into the picture, and can we sync with Wave or Tableau or something for reporting purpose?
You can. There's actually an add-on so that you can push Wave data. I think it's just called the Wave Connector add-on or something like that. But it'll take your Heroku Postgres data and push that up to Wave. So you could do that as well. And to your other question, where if it was persisted in Kafka would depend on what you plan to do. Certainly some folks will persist there and do other things with it. Some will send the logs to like maybe a secure S3 bucket if they think they might have to go back, or the retention window on their Kafka is too short. Like our defaults are 2 weeks, which is good for most people, but if you needed some I think financial companies that I've dealt with, they seem to have long retention needs for those logs. But there's a lot of Kafka connectors for sending it either to Postgres or to most things, to various databases, or to an S3 bucket or whatever. Does that answer your question? Oh.
But the big data is also a Salesforce product, right? So if I want to use that for financial or, we are in the piracy domain, so we wanted to store all the piracy data, for example, for 10 years. Yeah. So where the big object come into the picture here, like in the whole hierarchy?
So that's actually been, you're talking about like with Crux and some of the stuff that they're doing? Or, because that's actually been on my list too, to see where we can leverage them in some of these architectures, although I have not done that yet. But it's definitely like, with some of the other acquisitions, either certain parts that don't fit together yet, or we're trying to figure out which parts you swap out and how you prioritize that work over other work. But that's definitely on my radar, is to leverage Crux for a lot of that stuff.
Thank you.
Is Heroku actually running on AWS or?
Yes. Okay. Yep. We are 100% on AWS. Even our IT, we don't have a server in a closet anywhere. Any other? Oh, we have one over here. Make Vic run. Go. Do it.
Thanks. A lot of the apps you showed, they had like web front ends. Like how much do they use Heroku to build just a back end, just APIs? And if that's the case, how much of the API features you have, like Swagger generation, client SDK, things like that, and API management, do you have any of that?
We have yes. There are very few things on Heroku. I'm trying to think if there's any. I'm sure actually I can think of a couple, but pretty much everything you can do via the API. And there are teams that I didn't put slides in there, but there are teams who only use, say, the Kafka stuff. Like they have, like for instance, so logs that come out of Salesforce instances, and so they do some like Spark processing, runs through Kafka and stuff like that. Those kind of systems, there'd be no web front end or support-ish monitoring systems that flow through Kafka and then generate alerts based off like Spark processing and then send them off to various places. Is that?
Do you help with the actual API design? So let's say I build my app, I don't generate my Swagger. Most people don't like editing their YAML file or JSON file and doing things like that. Or simple client to just, I test my API, I don't have an actual front end for me to test it or mock it up. And there's a bunch of API design functionality that some other PaaS providers have. So I just wonder what in Heroku matches with that, and if Salesforce uses it, or if it uses a lot because of the front end features that you have as well.
So I'm curious, well, let me see if I'm understanding your question correctly. Do you mean API in terms of managing the platform or API for your app? When you mentioned Swagger, I was thinking, oh, okay, you're talking about your app. Okay, no, in terms of that, the closest thing I would say that we do is we have a notion of like, so if you had let's say you had a purely front end, like a single page app, and you just had a few endpoints you wanted to connect to, then we have a, what's called a static build pack. And that build pack will allow you to use a JSON file to configure those backends. But it wouldn't, I don't think it would really solve what you're getting at, but that would be the closest I would think. All the other APIs are for managing the platform itself. Any other questions? All right, guess not. You guys got some time back. If any questions do pop up, there is a Heroku booth out there, and those folks are very knowledgeable.